Welcome back to this course, Introduction to the Java Programming Language. This is a presentation of coding boot camps. In this video, we are going to discuss class constructors, object constructors, and we are also going to discuss reference types. So we've been talking about how a class provides blueprints for objects, or custom types for objects. So if we take a look here, we can see that there are actually two classes being instantiated. So we are instantiating the point class, passing in these two numbers here, or these two integers to initialize it to the constructor. And we are instantiating this we're instantiating point as origin 1. Then we actually have the rectangle class being instantiated. Our first object, rect1, has a different type of constructor than the one below. Let's take a look at this constructor. This constructor is actually taking origin 1 as one of the parameters, and then it looks like two other integers. And then here for rect2, it seems that it's just taking two integers here. So we have the same class initialized in two different ways. There are at least two constructors, each of which takes different sets of parameters. Also, the way that the constructor is called is how Java knows which constructor to use during initialization. So each of the statements has the three parts. So it has the declaration, it has the instantiation new keyword, and then the constructor is over on the right. And we can see that right here. We have the object, we have the class, and then we have the constructor. And we have also discussed recently primitive types. So if you think about it, what were our primitive types? We had int, we had bool, we had float, we had double. Those are what we call primitive types. So they are base types that we get with Java. They are the foundational types that many classes, if not all classes, are built upon. Then we also have reference types that we can continue to reuse. Things like string. String itself is not a primitive. We reuse string quite a bit. That might be the most popular of everything that we see here. But string is actually a class, a reusable class made up of character or char primitives. Then we have the scanner, random, die, our integer array, string array, our array lists, and our hash map. These are all types that we can reuse, but they are not primitive types. So for our assignment, we want to create an application that uses our gets and sets to store information for a student. So we saw an example of that, and at the end of this video, we're actually going to go over an example, and you'll actually have this source code. So think about the attributes of a student, and think about the methods a student might have as well. So in summary, we discussed classes, objects, and methods, instantiating objects, declaring methods, the set and the get methods, initializing objects with constructors, and we talked about primitive types versus reference types. So in your materials, you will have links to the private tutoring sessions for software engineering and the private tutoring sessions for the Java programming language. Thank you. Let's take a look at an example of the assignment that we have. So they want us to use encapsulation for a student class. So we are encapsulating this data here. We see the private visibility on name, ID number, age, and status. And you can come up with additional properties or additional attributes for student, but in this case, we're just going to limit it to what we have here. And these were, since we're using encapsulation, we want to use the sets and the get methods. So these are the methods we are using for the student class class so far. We have the set age, set name, set ID number, and set status. We also have gets. So we have the get age, which returns an integer. We have the get name, which returns a string. We have get ID number, which returns a string, and get status, which also returns a string. So you can take a look there. And we also have two constructors. And these two constructors initialize the student class in different ways. Let's come down here to our main method. And the first thing we're doing here is we're instantiating student. We're creating object myStudent. And the constructor we're using is going to be the constructor where we pass a string. So this is what we're going to do. So we're essentially going to initialize status here in the constructor. Then we are going to call on myStudent. We're going to call setAge, and it takes an integer. So we're going to pass in an integer. We're going to call then setName on myStudent, and the setName takes a string. So we see here the double quotes. So we'll pass in the student name. And then we're going to call setID on object myStudent, and that also takes a string. So we're going to pass in this string here as our ID number. Now we want to get the data. So as far as encapsulation, this data is only accessible to the student class. So what we're going to do is use the student class or use the student object. So now we're going to, in order to get the age of the student, we already have instantiated myStudent, where we've instantiated student with and created object myStudent. So we're going to call getAge on myStudent, and getAge returns an int. We can see it up here, returning an int. So we need an int here in order to return the data. So we have studAge. We call getAge, and we output studAge to the console, and that way we can view it. Again, same idea with student name. On object myStudent, we call getName. GetName returns a string, so we're returning to a string called studName, and we're outputting studName to the console. GetID. GetID again returns a string. And so we're outputting to a string, returning to a string, and we are outputting that string to the console. And then finally, get status. We want to get the status whether the student is new or a returning student. So we know that get status returns a string. We can see it here. So we need to return it to a string that we call stud status. And then we output stud status to the screen. Notice there's no set status because we're doing that here, implicitly doing it here through the constructor. And we have our object over here. Our project. We created our Java project. We have a package called student, which we all see here at the very top of the class file. And here's our class file. So let's select our class file, right-click, and do Run As Java Application. And then we'll see here the output. So we're getting our output here, which is the student age, which is 19. We're getting back the student name, which is John Doe. We're getting the ID number, and we are getting the status that was set from the constructor. So please take a look at the lab, extend it if you have any ideas to make it better, and also stay tuned for the next session.